I'm happy to introduce our latest publication in Strategic Entrepreneurship Journal, in which we examine how a private equity investor influences the strategic decisions taken by their portfolio firms, and this depending on the performance context in which those firms find themselves in, as well as on the incentives and influence of the private equity investor concerned. To this end, we draw on the behavioral theory of the firm, which essentially argues that firms will be most likely to undertake strategic change as they perform worse and worse compared to their aspirations, and they're least likely to undertake that change as they overperform compared to their aspirations. So essentially, when there's no problem to be solved, they can sit back and relax. Now, of course, when a new owner, like a private equity investor, enters the firm, the situation can dramatically change. And this to the extent that actually some of those traditional behavioral theory of the firm predictions may no longer hold. First of all, a private equity investor, when they enter, they'll dramatically raise the bar. They'll come in with a new set of aspirations, of course with an eye towards future value creation and realizing a return. Secondly, though, a private equity investor tends to be an active owner. So they'll actively guide the company. They'll try and influence them. They'll monitor their performance. So they'll intervene in those companies even when things are going well. They will not sit back and relax. That being said, we of course kind of recognize that a private equity investor also has limited attention and resources. So it's going to be unlikely that they're going to intervene in each of their portfolio firms to the same extent. And so specifically what we argue in this paper is that this is going to vary depending on the incentives a private equity investor has to intervene, which we argue will go hand in hand with the amount of money they've invested. And secondly, it'll depend on the influence they have in their portfolio firms. What we argue here, so every private equity investor tends to have board seats. But what we know from the board literature is that it's not because you have a seat on the board that equals influence. So we argue that when a private equity investor will appoint more senior board members to the boards of their portfolio firms, that they'll be able to weigh more on the decision-making process in the board. And so specifically, those more senior appointed board members will be able to steer the strategic decisions towards the preferences of the private equity investor. To test this, we look at two specific strategic actions that portfolio firms may take, being either capital investments or acquisitions. The reason for that is that private equity investors are known to foster value creation in their portfolio firms, being either through internal growth strategies, like capital investments, or external growth strategies, like acquisitions. But what we lack insight to this day within the private equity literature, as well as the broader behavioral theory of the firm literature, is when a private equity investor will prioritize each growth strategy.
To test our ideas, we analyzed rich data from 51 portfolio companies owned by a mid-sized European private equity investor. This data included specific performance targets and the growth strategies of these firms. Confirming our predictions, our analysis revealed that both a firm's performance context and the private equity investor's financial commitment and board member experience significantly impact the chosen growth strategies. When firms fall short of their goals, private equity investors with substantial stakes are more likely to encourage capital investments while discouraging acquisitions. This aligns with behavioral theory of the firm principles, particularly in scenarios resembling the oversight found in larger or public firms. However, when private equity investors hold smaller stakes or appoint less experienced board members, a shift occurs, leading to less proactive management strategies. But when companies are doing better than they expected, the story changes. Larger investments by private equity investors correlate with a decrease in capital investments and an increase in acquisitions. Though this trend quite surprisingly reverses with more experienced board members. The latter finding might be explained by experienced board members' desire to maintain their high reputations and avoid the risks associated with acquisitions. In a nutshell, our research makes three key contributions to theory and practice. First, it highlights the importance of considering direct performance aspirations, particularly in private equity contexts where aspirations can differ significantly from past performance. Second, it integrates the behavioral theory of the firm with corporate governance perspectives, showing how a powerful and value-focused owner can challenge traditional behavioral theory of the firm predictions. And lastly, it sheds light on the growth strategies of private equity-backed firms. These are not just a response to performance metrics, but are also deeply shaped by the governance dynamics and preferences of the investor.